Hey guys, welcome back to my cake world. Today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make this adorable messy hair girl cake. Now I've used a couple of edible material to decorate this beauty. I'll show you all that and share some techniques, tips and tricks. Alright, let's get started. I've got some spaghetti and noodle strands in different thicknesses. I'm soaking them in hot water. I colored this batch the color that I want, and once they're soft I'm going to give it a sort of a loopy shape to resemble curls and let it dry overnight. For the flowers I have wafer paper. The whole sheet I'm coloring with vegetable oil mixed with food color. Let it dry overnight. The next day wipe off the extra oil and you can cut your flowers and leaves. Now here I'm using a flower puncher, and these steps you need to do a day ahead before you start with your cake. Moving on to the cake now, it's about 6 inch in diameter and 7 inch in height. For the dome, I took all the offcuts, mixed it with some buttercream and took the shape of the dome. So to cover the cake, I'm using ganache using 3:1 ratio, that is 3 part chocolate, 1 part cream, and also I added a couple of tablespoons of butter as well. Once I'm happy with the overall look, I'm covering the dome part of it with the green. Her hair will be green, so that's why the green fondant, and the rest I'm covering with white fondant. The white fondant is about 1/4 of an inch thick. I wanted enough thickness for me to really smooth the fondant all around. Put the cake back in the fridge to set after you cover it with fondant before you start painting on the cake. So I'm pinning my image in position and tracing over every detail I need. Now some lines I can see, some are not visible enough, so I'm just tracing over that with a pencil. Now here, one thing you need to make sure when you're tracing, don't press too hard on the fondant with your tracing tool, and it'll make holes on the fondant, and when you go to paint it's a nightmare because you can't do fine detailing or paint fine detail on that area. So to start painting, I always do a color test on a piece of fondant, especially if it's a skin color. And my first layer always a light layer of color. Now here I'm starting from the edge of her face and working my way to the middle of the face, making sure where the light falls on the face and where her shadowy areas are. Don't take a lot of colors to your paintbrush. Let the first layer dry and then you can go back and color again. some of her features I wanted it to be 3D. So her ears and fingers I'm sculpting out of modeling paste. Now to sculpt them, I'm keeping it against the reference picture and making her fingers so I know it's accurate. For her clothes, I'm using fondant, and to get that jersey effect, I'm using an impression mat. Where her hands are, rather than adding a just flat piece of fondant, I wanted it to look more natural, as if it's draping on her hands. So I'm rolling a piece of modeling paste into a sausage shape and then pasting it on the cake. Painting her lips. Now I wanted it in black, so I made a mistake. I'm removing the color here. I'm using clear alcohol and clean cotton swab to remove the color there. I'm not going to right away paint on that. I'm going to let it dry, and then after some time I can go back and color there. Now, whenever you make a mistake and you want to remove your color, use clear alcohol or lemon extract. You can wipe it off with a clean cotton swab. Let that area dry before you go back and color. Now remember, I said be gentle when you are tracing your image onto the fondant. The reason why is, if you look closely here, you can see I have poked 2 holes where her nose area is. So I had hard time covering it and painting over it. So be gentle when you are tracing your image onto the fondant. I'm moving on to her hair now. I'm going after a sort of a messy, curly, bulky hairdo. Now, when I designed this in my head, I decided to use fondant for her curls, but all the time I was adding fondant onto the cake, all I could think of was, what if I could use wafer paper instead of fondant? Wafer paper, you can make wafer paper tubes, and at that it'll be much lighter and you can get a nice volume and it'll be less time consuming. But at the end I decided to stick to fondant because it gives me more of a nice curly effect, whereas wafer paper would give me sort of a feathery effect. Alright, finish adding her curls, but at the end it looked flat, so decided to add a different texture to bring out more curl effect. I used the extruder to pipe out spaghetti strands and I'm twisting it to make it look like curls and adding it there. At the end it did work and I like the more messy look it has right now. Before moving on to the next step, I'm going to color her hair to give it a nice depth to it and to show off all the highlights and the shadowy corners of her curls. Final step. Now these are all the dried spaghetti and noodle strands for her hair, sort of to mimic the frizzy, messy hair strands poking out, of course with the flowers on it. To attach flowers and leaves to the strands, I'm using wafer paper glue. Okay, I want to show you this here is melted cocoa butter. Now, when I'm going to insert noodle strands and the spaghetti strands to the cake, the noodles gonna absorb the moisture in the cake, and once they do, it's gonna go soft and it won't be able to hold its shape. So to prevent that, I'm applying a thin layer of melted cocoa butter where it touches the cake. If you don't have cocoa butter, you could replace it with melted chocolate. Some finishing touches to the board here and there, and there she is, all completed. Now it took 2 days for me to complete her, 2 full days. Alright guys, so I hope you got inspirations watching this video and learned a few things along the way. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys soon with another one. Till then, take care you guys.